Hello and welcome. My name is Cheryl Miller and I am a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator in South Australia. My card today for the Creating Kindness Design Team blog hop featuring florals features the faux alcohol technique. I'm creating an ombre background to hold the heat embossed breathtaking bouquet stamp set from Stampin' Up! I originally recorded this video on a Facebook Live in my Stampin' Up! Group. This is a public group. It's specifically created to host my weekly creative Facebook Lives, and the link is included in the video description below. Some of the other Creating Kindness design team have also created videos, and the links are also included in the video description below. I've created two colorways of my card today. This one is Calypso Coral, and the alcohol background goes from a dark shade at the bottom, graduating up the page to a lighter shade at the top. However, the card created in the video will be using three blue tones. To create a faux alcohol background, the key ingredient is rubbing alcohol. This is the brand we get in Australia and it contains isopropyl alcohol. It's an antiseptic solution, so is readily available in the supermarket and pharmacies. Look for something similar in your country. This is the alcohol component of our inky mixture. The colour is added with ink refills and then applied with sponges. I cut the Stampin' Up! Large sponges into 6 wedges and that works well. You'll need some glossy white cardstock for this technique. The glossy surface allows the alcohol mixture to move around on the card. You can get glossy cardstock at stationers, art shops or craft shops. I've cut down an A4 sheet into 4 pieces. The other elements to the card are a Sahara Sand standard C6 folded card and a white layer which has been cut to 10 centimetres across and 14.3 centimetres down. So the equivalent in Imperial would be a standard A2 folded card with a white layer cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. The glossy piece is larger than what we'll need and I will cut it down after we've done our creating to form the correct size background. Now to set up the background, grab some paper and a silicone craft mat to work on, also some paper towel and a palette of some sort. The Stampin' Up! Embellishment containers work really well once empty, but I have a painting palette with little bowls in it. And I'll also use a small paintbrush to stir in the colour. In my original Facebook Live, I created 2 cards. One was in a Calypso Coral colouring and the other was in the blue colourway, and the blue colourway is the one we're going to show for the Creating Kindness video today. So I'm using 3 different colours and I have here ink refills for Pool Party for the light shade, Coastal Cabana for the medium shade and Bermuda Bay for the darker shade. These 3 colours will give us the gradient or ombre look to our alcohol background. Let's start off with the Pool Party, which is the lighter shade. Use about 3 drops of refill and some rubbing alcohol and mix them together. I have probably just added a little bit too much of the rubbing alcohol, so I will be very careful when I pick it up with my sponge to pick up a small amount at a time, otherwise it's going to flood onto the paper. So I'm just dabbing the ink onto the glossy white card surface. That will create lots of texture and the ink moves around as you add more of the alcohol fill solution to it. The texture is good, you do want lots of texture. So just make sure it's all nicely covered. And then we'll move on to the next colour, which is Coastal Cabana. So I'll use about the same amount, about 2 or 3 drops of colour. This time I'll add a little bit less rubbing alcohol, mix that solution up, and then with a fresh sponge I'll apply this darker colour to the bottom 2/3 of the glossy cardstock, right over the top of the Pool Party. Keeping the texture thing happening here, you can see it all moving around on the cardstock. That will eventually blend in together, that's fine, but we do want to try and get rid of this line that we've got happening across where the coastal cabana meets the pool party. So use both of the sponges and just work the colour in together, adding more of the pool party further up into the top of the card. So pick up a little bit of the pool party ink and just work that across the top to blend those two colours together. To prep to add the darkest colour now, I'm going to mix up some Bermuda Bay with a couple of drops of refill, a little bit lesser amount of rubbing alcohol to make it nice and intense. And then I'll also remix some of the Coastal Cabana just with another drop of ink refill, a little bit more rubbing alcohol, just so I've got some solution there to do some blending. The Bermuda Bay is very intense, and so when I apply it, it's quite a bit darker, so I will need to do a little bit of blending work with the Coastal Cabana into the Bermuda Bay. You can see I'm working with both sponges to just blend those colours together. And so what I will end up with is the lighter shade at the top, the lovely Coastal Cabana across the middle, and the darker Bermuda Bay at the bottom. This is quite wet, so I'm going to dry it off with a heat tool. You could leave it to sit and dry if you wanted to. As you dry the colours off, you'll notice that some of the lines might still come a little bit straight, so just add a little bit more colour as you need to blend the colours together. I'm just continuing to work these colours, and you can see as you add the colour over the top, it continues to blend and work, which is the beauty of the alcohol solution on the glossy cardstock. And that's just about it. I'm pretty happy with the way that looks now. It's created this gorgeous ombre glossy background, which is going to look fabulous with our floral image over the top. Now that my background is very dry, the breathtaking bouquet image can be embossed onto it. Now I'm using the Stamparatus to stamp this large image, and the issue is that the image is as large as the piece of card that I'm trying to stamp on, so there's nowhere to put the magnet to hold the card down in place. My solution is to use a sheet of grid paper with a temporary adhesive applied to it, so I can place the glossy card down and the temporary bond will hold it in place. So here's my grid paper. You can see it's sticky. I've used Zig two-way glue, applied some, let it dry, and then it becomes a post-it note type stick. Or you could use some temporary roll-on glue if you've got that there. Now I'm going to stamp an index image so I can stamp this floral image exactly where I want it on my beautiful background. So I have a polypropylene sheet which sits in place, butted up into the corner. I've inked the stamp up with Memento and stamped an index image, which is a little difficult to see in the video, but there is an image on the polypropylene sheet. I'll place my adhesive backed sheet down in place, and I'm going to be able to position that beautiful background exactly where I want it underneath the image on the polypropylene sheet. Now if I place this down with that corner butted exactly where it was before, then I know that this is going to stamp onto this piece of card in exactly this spot. So even though I can't place the magnet on the background sheet, I know I can place it up in the corner of the grid paper and everything will hold in place for me. I'll swipe my background with an embossing buddy just to remove any oil static fingerprints, and then I'm going to ink up my stamp with Versamark ink, giving it a really nice juicy coating so I can make sure that I get the entire image stamped. I'll put some additional pressure around the edges of the stamp just to make sure that I get the entire image stamped. And then once I lift this plate, the cardstock will come away from that temporary bond on the grid paper quite easily. I'm now applying the embossing powder, the Whisper White embossing powder, all over this stamped image. And thankfully it looks like I have managed to get the whole image onto the background. It's looking very gorgeous already. I'm going to heat that now with a heat tool until the embossing powder melts. And while I know that we all still marvel at the embossing process, I've put this on super speed because it did take a little while. I'm trying to be careful not to burn my fingers. And I think we've mostly got it all by this stage. Nope, you can see I've missed just a tiny section here on the edge, so I'll just quickly melt that little bit as well. And there is our delicious ombre background with that beautiful floral image embossed over the top. Now we will have to trim this piece down. The measurements in metric are 9.7 centimetres by 14 centimetres, and the equivalent measurement in inches is 3 7/8 by 5 1/8 of an inch, and that will fit nicely onto your A2 card and onto that Whisper White layer that we cut previously. So now we can go ahead and put our card together. The embossed background goes nicely onto that Whisper White layer we cut earlier, so I'll just apply that with some liquid glue. That's then going to fit nicely onto that folded card front. But first of all, before we adhere it, we'll need to add some of this gorgeous Whisper White crinkle seam binding ribbon around those card layers. So I'll cut a strip to go around the card and let me tie a bow. I have pre-embossed the happy birthday greeting from the Peaceful Moments stamp set onto various coloured cardstock using Whisper White embossing powder, and then I've die cut them with this die from the Sweetly Stitched dies. It was a toss-up whether we used the Coastal Cabana greeting or the Bermuda Bay greeting. So with the help of my Facebook Live watchers, we eventually decided on the darker Bermuda Bay greeting. So now I need to put a couple of holes in either end of this greeting. I'm using my handheld 1/8 of an inch hole punch, but there is a new punch in the Stampin' Up! Mini catalogue. It's on page 41 and it's called the Label Me Fancy punch, and it has a little hole in that punch specifically designed to do this sort of hole punching in the edge of your labels. So now that we've got the two holes, I can thread the ribbon through from the front to the back on one side, and then through from the back through to the front on the other side. Once I've got my ribbon through, I can then adhere the label to the card front with a couple of dimensionals. I'll use 3 or maybe 4 dimensionals, 4 probably. Remove the backs and get that positioned where I want it onto that card layer. Then I'll go ahead and tie the bow off to the side on the left hand side. Muddle that around a little bit till you get it how you like it, and then from there trim the ends, and this layer is now ready to adhere onto your folded card front. I'm going to use some liquid glue to tape it down with some snail. Once this layer is nicely placed onto the card front, then I'll just do a little bit more fiddling with my bow. I did create this card live in my Facebook group. At the same time, I also created another card with Calypso Coral alcohol ink solution, but using just the one colour in varying shades. So these are the two cards I created. Feel free to jump on over to my Stampin' Up! Group and join us for my weekly lives on a Wednesday evening or a Wednesday morning in Australia. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.